This week's episode is sponsored by the psychological horror nightmare, Return to Silent Hill. When a mysterious letter draws James back to Silent Hill, he finds a town consumed by a terrifying fog. As he searches for the woman he once loved, the streets begin to warp around him, filled with monstrous creatures, impossible visions, and a horrifying revelation that he may not survive. Based on the legendary Silent Hill 2 and directed by Christoph Gans, Return to Silent Hill blends haunting psychological horror with surreal, nightmarish imagery that fans of the franchise know all too well. Some truths should stay buried in the fog. Watch now on Screambox.
Welcome to this week's episode of Safe Room, your weekly source for horror gaming discussions and proudly part of Bloody Disgusting's Bloody FM podcast network. I'm your host, Jay Krieger.
And I'm the other one, Neil Bolt.
And this week we have an all-new edition of our grab bag where Neil and I bring the games that we've been playing over the last week or so to the table and share them. And, this sort of month has been kind of all over the place because of my scheduling stuff. We've had some internet issues on both of our ends, so we haven't had as many features as we normally do, but we'll be returning to that sort of magazine-style approach that we adopted at the beginning of this year in July, because we've got some pretty big anniversaries coming up for two very notable games at that. But before we get into what we've been playing, Neil, how are you doing this week?
Yeah, we're just getting off the tail end of the heat wave over here, so that's been pleasant. Like I said, it's gone down enough that it feels quite cool and lovely, but still just like you stand in the sun slightly too long, you feel it suddenly. It's it made last week unbearable, and like obviously having just fixed the internet issues, it messed the internet up again for the week. So it's like I think literally the day after we recorded last week, it's like internet started tanking back because of the heat wave. I was like,
Oh God!
So luck was with us last week at least.
Yeah. Well,
what about you then?
I'm good, man. I'm in the same boat as you, unfortunately, in terms of the weather. It's like, we're just had some really bad weather, had like one day of a reprieve, and now we're back to leading into a heat wave of like multiple days of high 90s to low hundreds. But fortunately, if the power and AC stays with me, it'll be a good excuse just to catch up on some games for coverage and whatnot. So,
yeah, absolutely will.
But in getting into what we've been playing lately, to sort of beat the heat, if you will, Neil, what have you been playing recently?
Oh, a few things. I mean, it's been sort of a going back to stuff I've played before. Really, I don't. I get these little whims occasionally where like I'll delete some big stuff off my PlayStation, like leave a load of room, and think, oh, I'll just put a whole bunch of smaller games in and try them out again. And so I did that with 3 games in particular, one of which was Devil May Cry 4, which I won't talk about too much because that's that series has another anniversary coming up as well, so I'm sure we'll talk about it more. But it's probably the Devil May Cry I've played the least, which is saying something considering 2 is abysmal. It's just because of when it came out and the time it came out, and how I was kind of feeling about Devil May Cry, because of the impact that 2 had on my opinion of the series for a long time. Yeah, it's one that I always have like these vague scratches of what I think it is, and I don't know, I come back to it, I get a little bit further, come back to it, get a little bit further again, and like I finished it before, but like it's been a while since I've done so. Like I mean, I booted up this time and it said I played for 9 hours. I was like, how am I on this? like on this particular version anyway. But yeah, no, it's like I think I appreciate more now that it is probably the most like the first game in terms of like pace and style, like in terms of the Gothic architecture's back in there, and it's kind of like a reboot of the story with Nero taking over for Dante, and I kind of now see more of the Nero that was in DMC5. Well, I think playing that game, because I had such a poor memory of 4, I used to just think, oh no, why has this guy got the riding glow up of being like he was a fop and now he's suddenly like, a badass sort of thing? But no, it's all there. I think thinking back now, it's like my criticism at the time was like he's probably not different enough from Dante, like in terms of like personality, a little more goody, but still like with the quips and then doing cool shit and stuff. But hey, that's not really a problem in terms of moveset. They are different enough. Yeah, it was just a blast to play through, to be honest, again. And the only sort of real complaint, because it's from the sort of PS3, Xbox 360 era, is like the opening half an hour of that game is like cutscene, loading, cutscene, loading, cutscene, loading, 2-minute gameplay segment, cutscene, loading, and it just goes like that for a while until you really get back into the rhythm of what that sort of mission structure that Devil May Cry has quite one nicely, where you play like a good 20-30 minute chunk of the game, do a little bit, get a little bit of story, get to the next bit. Yeah, it's I love it. It's got all the great over the top characters. It's that visual style that's somewhere between what Resident Evil 4 was and the sort of gurky, horrible stuff that we're going to get later from Capcom in terms of engine wise. I'd say actually it's more reminds me more of like Dead Rising sort of visuals, like at that time, in terms of like the later ones, where like especially with like some of the pronounced character sort of designs and stuff. Yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. Like, just one of those whims. I was thinking, I've played all the others in recent memory, but I didn't really play much of 4 when we sort of covered the last, I think, the 25th anniversary of the 20th anniversary.
20th, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Get my Capcom franchises mixed up here. But yeah, so yeah, it was cool to sort of get onto it. I was going to sort of jump onto the next game in the series after that and go back to DMC, but yeah, I think I'll probably go and pop on Bayonetta instead next, because that's another one I haven't played in a long time.
Yeah, this is one that I think I remember playing the first hour of it in high school. So that's barely even remembering experiencing it, right? But I think that, in getting to play through the original 3, and then, of course, with DMC, when we covered that for the show years ago at this point, I would be happy to go back and get to like specifically play this one for the first time, for inevitably us covering a series milestone again in short time. I think later this year. So the notion of just like more characters, but being somewhat of a return to form in terms of like the aesthetic of it, because that was always for me, even if I didn't have the same type of like nostalgia that you clearly do for the series when we went and covered those original 3 games and whatnot. I still found that to be part of the Devil May Cry sort of identity that really resonated with me in a big way, like you were saying, that gothic style. And so to kind of, I do, however, have a soft spot for like this specific era's graphical look, which you were talking about, mostly with Capcom games, that being something like Dead Rising, and then of course Resident Evil from this era. So to have a graphical style that utilizes that aesthetic of gothic architecture and characters and just generally speaking weird monsters, I would really relish getting to play this one for real this time. However, I do think it's very funny that like games from this era, it's almost like, is there no forward thinking here in terms of what you were just saying about the first half an hour of it being like a slog? And that's something that I've experienced with a lot of games that I've gone back to play, which has actually prevented me from replaying them specifically because I'm like, okay, do I really want to sit through, 45 minutes of cutscene before I can actually just like be given true control of this game?
Yeah.
Especially with a game that's the 4th in the series, you're just like, yeah, I'm pretty sure people can like get the gist of the mechanics here and whatnot. But yeah, I'm excited to experience this one truly for the first time.
Yeah, I think obviously the game does kind of encourage you to do tutorials like at the beginning, which you can turn off in the special edition at least. So that kind of accounts for some of it, but at the same time, like, yeah, a better sort of onboarding would have been fine. At the same time, in fairness, like one of the things I did come away from this one with is that cutscenes are just so incredibly well directed. Like in terms of just like the fight choreography and how clean and everything is and how well it looks, and like the transition from cutscene to scenes again is like pretty smooth. I mean, I'm sure we've gone about this a lot in the past, but it just the detail that is there in like a very arty sort of style, like in terms of the architecture and in terms of like the design of the characters and stuff. It's like it's just really crisp. Like I know it's obviously like a HD whatever sort of special version, if you will, but it still looks like amazing for a game that's nearly 20 years old at this point. And yeah, so it was quite cool to watch those early cutscenes, even if they were just kind of like repeating the notes of earlier Devil May Cries of people getting impaled by swords and pulling swords out of themselves and stuff. But yeah, it's like it's nice to have a little fix to Devil May Cry, and reminded me that with all the other things Capcom have been making and remaking in recent times, it was like we haven't really had another Devil May Cry since 5, so like it's suddenly been a while again.
I guess my only question about the cutscenes is that, clearly you were just saying that they are very much kind of like the anime centric fighting style. But like with 4 and moving into 5, which I've only played a little bit of, is it kind of like not shoehorn, that's not the way to phrase that. Like, is it becoming more about like the relationships of the characters? Does it kind of like front load this narrative in the way that I found like Resident Evil 5 and 6 really did, where like there's a lot of this extraneous dialogue and these going into the weeds in terms of the relationships and the overarching narrative that feels like intrusive to the gameplay? Or does Devil May Cry 4 sort of like circumvent that for the most part?
I mean, they don't go super in depth. I mean, they tried to have like and things like that, but you can easily like be not paying attention to it and going, sorry, what does this mean? What does that mean? Sort of thing. Like, and most of it, you're like, fighting again doesn't matter, sort of thing for a bit. But which I think is what confused me so much about this game in particular, because the cutscenes initially, I think it's the fact that the game when you first play it is like, the idea is, Dante's the bad guy this time, sort of thing. It's like he's not, but it's just the way it's sort of presented and stuff like that, and that didn't really rub me out the right way as well. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Your memory sort of falls to pieces on certain things like that, where just because you haven't sort of re-experienced it in a while, like I think it was just one of those games in a haze of games in that generation where I was like, I'll play this for 5 minutes, I'll play this for 5 minutes, I'll play that for 5 minutes. And yeah, that sort of 2007, 2009 period, especially, I think there were so many games I pick up, put down, pick up, put down. And that was one of them, I think, very quickly. I think I finished it the first time, like in a weekend, and then didn't touch it again, sort of thing.
Those are when you go back and revisit games that you haven't played in a while, whether it's because of poor pacing or it's just gets lost in terms of like the stuff that you're prioritizing. It's always kind of nice to have one of those nostalgia trips down memory lane, because you're just like, oh yeah, I remember that weekend actually, and just like thinking about the elements of that stood out to you and kind of like gave you that drive before you inevitably finished it and then moved on to something else. So it can be just as rewarding sometimes in revisiting things.
Yeah, I think what I remember most about that period of time in terms of like gaming was like usually living in a hotel or a pub, like in a room, smoking endless cigarettes, drinking beers, and playing video games, and like in my spare time. And that was it. That was probably the other reason why a lot of it didn't stand out at the time.
Right. Yeah, I feel that way about some games and movies as well from like college, where it's just like some early years of college for me just feel like a blur. So it's like that's kind of my relationship with some games and movies that I had on repeat or replaying. But at the same time, like there's a fondness there.
Yeah, I think that was like the key time for like pirating movies and torrenting them and stuff, because as I didn't get to go out much because of having to live in these places and not being able to literally had to be home by a certain time because otherwise I'd be locked out, sort of thing. And so yeah, it's like that would be it. So most of the movies of that time I'd literally just experienced through like being on a laptop, watching it buffer every 5 minutes sort of thing. It's like so it was actually quite revelatory when I did ever get to go to the cinema.
We could do a whole nother podcast on past sins of sitting there waiting for a bootleg movie to buffer every 5 minutes, like you said, because God, the amount of time I wasted in my youth dealing with that was. But that's for another podcast, as I was saying.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we should carry on with the game. So let's pick up with one you've been playing.
Yeah, I'll start with something that I picked up recently during the current Steam summer sale, which is Turok 2 Seeds of Evil. This is a franchise that I completely missed because I didn't grow up with an N64. It's funny, like being such a PC-centric household, naturally, I was in the Doom camp, the Marathon camp, and when I would try to talk to my friends about these games that I was coming to far later than when they actually were initially released, they had no idea what I was talking about because they were so busy playing games like Turok on their N64s and things like that. But, naturally, when Night Dive Studios is going to be at the helm of a remaster, like I'm not going to not pick up that, whatever that is at this point, because they just kind of are the de facto publisher and developer for, as we've covered many times with many games on the show, picking up the almost like the ashes, if you will, of forgotten games. In this case, it's a beloved franchise, but at the same time, like we hadn't had any PC ports or console ports of this game since. And so I just decided like, I'm going to browse Reddit and I'll see which entry people recommend the most out of the original trilogy. And I decided to go with 2. And I really had a blast with this game. I find that sometimes when I go back and I want to play something, even if it's an older game that's gotten this really loving remaster, it still shows a lot of its age in a way that like is not the fault of the game. I'm coming to this game almost 20 years removed from when it was released, right? So I'm still coming to this and being like, I have that in the back of my mind, but I am anticipating a lot of just like antiquated design to a degree and whatnot. But I was really impressed with Turok 2. And outside of like one of the features that was included with the remaster, I was kind of floored in terms of like, I don't know, the complexity. And what I mean by that is like, yeah, it presents itself as a very, straightforward first person shooter. But at the same time, like there are these they're like almost challenge rooms that come up throughout the game that are not avoidable because of the fact that like you really do need them to progress, because this game is hard as shit, which is very true to 90s PC games. But I think or 90s shooters for that matter. But I think for me, what I was impressed with was like, you are going through these levels and then there's this portal that allows you to be transported. And then you get to go through this like challenge room where you have to use all of the resources that you've gained on a given level to fight these like souped up squads of enemies. And then you go back to the main mission and whatnot. And then at the same time, you find additional portals that let you jump around the map to make sure that if you missed an objective, you can go back and complete it. Because if you don't complete all your objectives for a map, then you basically lose the level and have to restart. And so for me, like playing things from this era, like, Doom and all the Quake and everything, and this is not a knock against those games naturally, but like they were very linear in the sense that you go from the spawn point to the very end point. And for the most part, you're just trying to get there in one piece. Sometimes there would be special objectives or what have you, but for the majority of the time, it's like, yeah, you just want to survive. And so Turok having, a variety of objectives and having these massive maps that, are linear, but they are sprawling. And you do have to find some of these, hidden zones or hidden access points in the different levels to kind of like be able to suss out where you actually need to go. And I think at the end of the day, like it just ended up being a ton of fun to play because of the weapons and, the fighting dinosaurs and then fighting these crazy monsters and using bows and arrows. But then you've got a double barrel shotgun that's got explosive rounds. Like it just has a really, really fun arsenal of weapons that at the same time, like as devastating as they can be, I found this game to be pretty difficult in a way that I miss with some first-person shooters from, whether it would be the late 90s or the early aughts. And yeah, if anything, with the Steam Summer Sale going on, I'm going to go back and pick up not the first one, but the third Turok game as well. I guess before I blab any more about this, do you have much experience with the Turok series?
Literally 2 sessions in 1998, I think, were the sum of it. Because again, I didn't have a Nintendo system. Like it was someone else's would always come into it. Like my experiences with GoldenEye were very much the same. Like hung out with some people in college, and one of them had an N64, and we used to go back there and play most of those things there. So lots of multiplayer of Turok 2 was my experience, and everyone trying to basically cerebral bore each other, like
Yes.
with it, which obviously is like such a fun weapon to use. Which if you don't know, the juice it's like a skull drilling weapon, and does some very unpleasant things to the innards of your head. But no, it's like fun weapon set. I think at the time I kind of preferred it to GoldenEye just because I don't know, it just felt more colourful and more visceral, in terms of what you were getting. It felt more me, what I would want to play, sort of thing.
Yeah.
As much as I love James Bond stuff, it was just the gore and the over the top violence, and I like the kind of it's like a sadistic sort of Saturday morning cartoon idea of a shooter in so many ways. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, I played the first game when that got remastered just before this, I think, wasn't it? So, and that was okay. Like it's again, you can tell it's from the era. Like many of these sort of Night Dive remasters of shooters that aren't particularly great, but like it's important for preservation. It's like you can play them in a more palatable way at least, and see the flaws and go, oh yeah, but okay, so it's passable. You can play it and stuff like that. And dinosaur shooters, don't get that many of them. So well, a series that I've not really had much experience with, but like I still very much remember my short time with this one.
Yeah, I still am kind of like bewildered at the lack of capitalizing on the potential of this series post, I haven't played Turok 3, but just like thinking about the console generation leap between this and then what came out on, GameCube, and even, going into like the 360 PS3 era, because of the fact that we for so long were hearing things like, oh yeah, this notion of you being this hunter and that having like a huge survival element to it, of like the fact that you could come against human enemies and then make them bleed and that would lure dinosaur, but we never really got those kinds of strategic strategies. We just got, like, if anything, more linear and straightforward, sort of like first person shooter approaches with Turok. And I think that for me, like diving right into 2, and then naturally, as I said, I want to play 3 now. I'm just interested to see like the trajectory that this series would take from going from success with 1 and 2. 3, I know almost nothing about, but it was remastered. So it's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, I want to see what that looks like. But I think overall, like, I just really appreciate the fact that this is one of those remasters, and I suppose you should say one of many that Night Dive have done, that it feels like it has retained the true essence of what that original experience was like. That's that's my experience, even though I think outside of like you'd had 2 sessions. I had 1 session with Turok 2 on someone's console back in the day. But I think like it's not overbearing in a way that some remasters have been in the past. Like the one new addition is the fact that you can get basically like objective markers, because like I said, it's much larger environments and you've got these sprawling events that are occurring on all different aspects of it. But like the level design is not the most intuitive. And so that's one of those instances where I'm finding this is a remaster that is modernizing this game in the right way. Because from what I've read online prior to picking this up, the number one complaint of Turok 2 when it originally came out was like, yeah, it's difficult as shit to navigate these levels and ensuring that you're hitting all of these objectives. before you get to the end, and then you're just scratching your head about where the hell do I go? I just ran through this level for 45 minutes, and I missed two of my objectives. Like, where did I take a wrong turn? And so, I still had one or two instances. I spent about 5 or 6 hours playing through this, and I had one or two instances of like I had to actually backtrack because I missed an objective marker. But for the most part, I think my 5 or 6 hours would have been a lot longer had I not had that feature, because of the fact that, again, there's going to be a significant amount of backtracking involved. But yeah, like we've been saying, Night Dive, they kind of have this ability to make me interested in games that previously I either never had the opportunity to because of, just they're so far removed from the release date that I never would have had the chance to pick up a copy of it and actually run it. But I think at the same time, it can take games such as, the Turok franchise or, the more recently announced Sin Reloaded, which it's not a series that I would really think to go back and play, but Night Dive being at the helm of it makes me like, oh yeah, sure. They're going to take this, and even if the essence of what that game did back in the day doesn't necessarily blow me away, they're going to provide the best possible scenario or the best possible version for me to actually like get to play it, retain some of that, but removes more than likely a lot of the headache of trying to go back and playing the original version of that game if I could even make that happen for myself.
Yeah, it's like I said, the Night Dive is a good way to sort of experience these games at least. And like some of them are just going to be very difficult to appreciate. I think the work they do really does enhance the better ones. Like I think when we've discussed obviously Quake and Quake 2, we always said this very thing, with all the stuff that gets added and extra stuff. And I think those are like very different examples because they've had the companies involved getting involved and giving them extra stuff for it as well, which doesn't really happen with a lot of these companies because in most cases the developers are gone, which is a rarity. Hey, look, with the way things are at Xbox, that could be very much something that happens again for id and stuff, but hopefully not. But no, I think Turok as a franchise was like big at the time as well, and it's like it kind of deserves to be kept alive in a way like that. In a way, so many of those games did with stuff like Shadow Man and stuff like that. Little games that just popped up, and you're like, "Yep, that could do with it." And I mean, even when we covered like the Thing game and stuff like that, which is I'd never have thought in a million years would have got a remaster, and like that's the best thing about it. Yeah, I did fear that when Atari bought out like Night Dive, God, that's it because of Atari's reputation in the modern age. But no, if anything, it's got better and better in terms of preservation, even beyond Night Dive. So yeah, as a little aside, that's all good. But I think the Turok games are really interesting to look at. Like if you want to sort of look at the history of console shooters, especially because especially the first two games out early in that sort of realm. And Turok 2 was at the time I think almost on par with like the N64 crowd I knew, like in terms of multiplayer, like because of what it did. And like I said, I very much enjoyed it more.
Yeah, I'm somebody that even though I grew up on playing GoldenEye multiplayer with friends and things like that, Turok's whole just like premise and the vibe of that world and the weirdness of the enemies and the weapons and whatnot that you're using is just so much more my vibe. So it's a shame that I wasn't fortunate enough to really enjoy this in the heyday. But if anything, I think I'm probably very lucky, as many people are, that come to this series later on where you have these remasters, which is, probably, I don't think it's a stretch to say the best version of it that you could possibly play. So like I said, maybe I'll be reporting back on Turok 3 sometime in the near future. But until then, what else have you been playing recently?
Well, like I've been sort of on and off with Plants vs Zombies Replanted, which was the remaster of that game and the original game. And again, it's been a while since I played the official version. I think on Xbox I played like the backwards compatible version, and PC again I think I'd played a version of it. So it kind of makes it a bit more streamlined in terms of what you can do, and it has a few extra bits of content, if you will, and like yeah, it's fine. It's still Plants vs Zombies. It feels quite small now, the years removed from like playing it that original sort of thing. But yeah, I think when it came out, it was like in a little bit of an iffy state, which didn't need to be the case, considering it's not exactly the needing the hugest sort of glow up in terms of a remaster. But yeah, they've seemed to have tweaked and fixed a few things since then. And yeah, it's good fun as a tower defense game that just has that sort of very distinct look and idea, and that music is still like really great as well, like just the plinky plonky sort of stuff. And one of those rare occasions where like a mobile developer, in PopCap, like made something that was like transcended that platform and became a game that like worked on consoles and worked for other formats. And yeah, it's really fun to go and play it again. And sort of, I know there's been lots of modding with the original game, that have been done with all sorts of variations and stuff. So it's not quite as dense as that, but there's still quite a lot of stuff. And the mini games are great fun, like the walnut bowling and like which I've always enjoyed. Yeah, it does still sort of hold a challenge in the later levels, but I do find a lot of it is very, very easy. Like, like in terms of like the levels, I think it didn't really start having any trouble till like second to last level of the penultimate set. And even then, it was just like, oh, I'd forgotten to bring one thing along that would have made it easier. And
Right.
lo and behold, went back with that and a breeze sort of thing. So yeah, but I do think like all the extra bits of stuff. There's like a hardcore mode now as well, where you can, it basically does just reset your progress if you mess up. Which again, given that most of it's fairly easy, like yeah, it's not too bad, but like it does feel a bit tense when you get to those sort of stickier situations. Like, oh yeah, I need to sort of hurry up with these sort of thing. And there's also this like mode that's sort of in between called like cloudy day, where you get less sunlight, so you can pick up less sun, so obviously you have to be a bit more careful about what you put down and where. So that in itself sort of does ramp up the difficulty if you want to do it like that. So I like that they've tried different things to make it like more interesting like that, and you can like team up in like local co-op and online co-op and stuff now. And yeah, and there's even PvP, I think, which I've not tried, but like, yeah, it does add quite a lot to what I remember, like of being a very like simple mobile game that had a very distinct hook. And yeah, it's a nice way to sort of re-experience the game.
Yeah, I'm curious. Have you tried any of the co-op? Because I was a massive fan of the vanilla Plants vs Zombies, if you will, and the Game of the Year edition as well. But did you try co-op at all?
No, I haven't got to yet, but my kids are big fans of the game as well, so I will probably have to try that at some point to see what it's like.
Yeah, the only thing that I really remember about Replanted coming out was that there was like, if you look, there's a bunch of negative reviews on Steam for it, but that seems to be like people that feel like this is a repackaging, or if you will, a replanting of familiar content, but that had like that full price tag attached to it and whatnot, which I can't speak to, but I guess in terms of just like preserving the original essence of what made Plants vs Zombies such a fun and unique tower defense game, it sounds like they've kind of like at least provided that with a couple of new features and whatnot. Would you say that's fairly accurate assessment of this?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot more things to it. I think what the original sort of people, fans of the Game of the Year edition that came out before, I think, would complain about the fact that there was so much they could do with that version, like in terms of modding and stuff like that. And this kind of, that on PC you always get that sort of precious sort of nature about things when they get replaced, and when they've had so much modding opportunities for them. I think in time it's on PC especially, it's just like people have played it and gone, oh, actually, it's all right. Like the initial wave will be like the hardcore that have played it originally and have been playing modded Plants vs Zombies, which is surprisingly popular, to this day. Apparently the Steam version has like a head crab zombie as well, like in there. So, like, which I didn't know. I've been playing on PS5. So.
Well, I was going to say, like, you were talking about the difficulty of it, and I always found that this was a game that I really fell in love with because of the charm of it and the graphics, or I suppose the artistic style of everything, and just the general premise is one that I just really loved, and that I think drove me to play this a lot more than I probably would have a majority of other tower defense games that didn't have this kind of aesthetic and this like type of humor, because of the fact that it isn't terribly difficult. But I think that like those modifiers that you talked about would maybe cloudy day and whatnot would give me some maybe extra pause, or at least give me more of a reason to pick up this version. But at the same time, now I just feel like I want to reinstall Plants vs Zombies, the version that I have, because that's a game that gets by quite far on just that art style and whatnot. And I think if you just at least pay attention to sort of like the general progression and understanding that a good variety of plants with a variety of abilities will kind of like lead you to success in the ways you can string along those combos, then it won't be too difficult for a seasoned tower defense person. Before moving on, how are you a fan of like the newer direction that Plants vs Zombies took post Plants vs Zombies, or even Plants vs Zombies 2, which was, I think, mobile only? Like, what did you think of like Garden Warfare and those?
Well, yeah, you see, these were like big games in terms of like my kids growing up, like in terms of games they were interested in. Like, I guess the first sort of online game my son was into,
Cool.
that was Garden Warfare 2, which led to a sort of an exact pipeline to playing the more popular modern day stuff. That's modern day, he said. Fortnite is like nearly a decade old at this point, even. But yeah, it's like that character design stuff works quite well as like a class-based shooter. So yeah, I quite enjoyed the Garden Warfare games for what they were. I hate that they existed for the reasons they did, which is just EA going, well, everything's got to be something like this now, and like you've got to make a shooter or a racer or whatever out of whatever franchises we've got, and it kept interest in it alive long enough, though. I think that it meant that when we do get replanted, it helped, like in terms of like people's memories, because I think there was a younger generation that did enjoy the Garden Warfare game, especially because they were they were workable for kids, like in a way that other shooters weren't. So, and the stupid sense of humor with it and the weird sort of offshoots of ideas, it's quite cool.
Yeah, I do hope that we one day return to the more tower defense side of things, but I don't know if we're going to get there. Given, I mean, was PopCap even involved with this anymore, or was this all another subsidiary of EA, Lost Pixels or something?
I mean, their name's on it, and so I assume so.
Yeah.
And I know they were still behind the Garden Warfare games, but when did the last one come out properly? That was quite a long time ago now. Oh God, yeah, that would have been. I know Steam has it listed as being like 2020s, but I know it's older than that. But yeah, it's been a while, and I don't know. Mobile games obviously are a very different thing these days, but it's a fun little franchise that tries something different, and I'm quite happy that it did. But yeah, it was one of those weird ones of EA smaller ones that weren't mobile based, where they could have made more of them, and you're like, oh, that would have been fine, like that, and they didn't. Same with Peggle. Like I know Peggle 2 was like a running joke of like that E3 where the guy comes on stage and like gets overexcited for announcing Peggle 2, but Peggle 2 is like fantastic. Like, as a game, it just works beautifully. I love it. Like it's fantastic. I wish we'd got more. But any sort of like newer versions of those games kind of came out on mobile, and they were like early access, and I just don't fuck with that. I can't deal with mobile games.
Yeah.
I find no need for them in the modern age.
Yeah, I mean that's been the most upsetting part about, I suppose, just in generally speaking, like PopCap being consumed by EA was that when we inevitably got around to Plants vs Zombies 2, like I couldn't have been more thrilled for that. And then I sat down and actually started to play it, and I was like, I would give you $60 right now to strip all this pay to win type shit out of it because of the fact that I just want more Plants vs Zombies 2. It's such a strong foundation, both again like the art style and everything, but also like you're branching out from the garden, if you will, like suburbia, and you've got these weird new settings, and like we're in ancient Egypt, and that's having an influence on the art style that's already so strong, and yet there's all this kind of bullshit on top of this where it's like you can only play this many times before you got to buy a recharge everybody knows the types of shit that they have there for mobile games, and that just like completely diluted an experience that again was not like the most hardcore experience, but it certainly is one of the most fun modern tower defense games that I've played that had such a strong identity that it could be blended into something like Garden Warfare and taken in a completely new direction. However, as we know, unfortunately it's about where the dollars are at, not so much the satisfaction of the fandom, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like I said, those games are all fantastic, but it's weird to think of where it sort of jumped from platform to platform. I mean, like Bejeweled was like a Facebook game for a long time that you could play against your friends, which was probably the most time I ever spent on Facebook. I think in my life was that, just playing that, because again, Bejeweled, simple idea, works brilliantly like that, and that's pretty much applied. I mean, Plants vs Zombies is like the most complicated series that PopCap had done, and like even that is quite simple. Even the shooter sort of idea is simple, but by their standards, it's like really branching out and trying something different. And it would be nice to find a middle ground. I don't know. It's because it's EA, like they don't want to go that small, I guess, and they don't see that market anymore. But and I get that. That's understandable. Like, but considering some of those games have probably raked in a lot more money than they cost to make compared to others, it's like apparently that's not a thing developers seem to worry about. Publishers, I should say. Sorry, they don't seem to worry about.
Well, I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, the brand is so strong that even if they decided to take that and revitalize it and push it in a new direction, I'd probably show up, at least check it out, see if it's any worthwhile. But Plants vs Zombies replanted. I'll have now. As we're talking, I'm reinstalling the original one on my Mac, but just go from there and see if I can stir up some of that early 2000s PopCap magic. But before we dive into the rest of what we've been playing, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll share what else we've been playing recently. But more on those games in a moment. And we're back from our break, and I'll just dive right into what else I've been playing. I've been playing a game that I've already talked about previously, but I was only about, I think, like 8 to 10 hours into it when I first was chatting about it, and just was very happy to report, not that I should have had any doubt since you talked so highly about it, but like just, okay, this is a game that I doubted pretty heavily initially when it was announced. Even after I saw reviews and things, I was just like, I really don't know if this is going to work. But now I can say, since I chatted about it the first time, just probably not even more than 2 months ago, I've probably sunk about another 40 hours into this game. That being Firaxis's Marvel's Midnight Suns. I think it is fair to say that I simply cannot put this game down. As my schedule gets busier and, unfortunately all these different obligations and things, like I'm not spending as much time with any one single game as I used to. This is actually the type of game that I actively would try to avoid most of the time because of just the like time sink. And it's like, I've spent 50 hours with this game. I could have spent, however, I could have played 25 2-hour games in the amount of time spent on this, but that truly is a testament to, the depth of the mechanics here with Midnight Suns. I really am so floored by the ability to just like take this turn-based, card-based strategy formula and just like blending it into something that is very simplistic to understand, but at the same time, all of these characters that you get in these heroes, they just become more complex in terms of the ways that you can exploit their greatest strengths. And the fact that, like, despite the fact that each one of these heroes has these different attributes and different abilities and different purposes in terms of that 3-person squad you have of, you've got the Hunter, which is this made up character for the Midnight Suns storyline. And then you have like these classic Marvel characters, Wolverine, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, Blade, what have you, that are a little bit more straightforward in terms of their purpose and their depiction because they're so established. However, like this is a game that I think really takes like what made XCOM so great in terms of a turn-based strategy and gives it a layer of added complexity with the card-based combat that I thought was going to be limiting. And the fact that these are arena-style missions, it's not this sprawling map that has a fog of war and you're uncovering additional enemies. It's a smaller arena, but it's more about how you're able to exploit, basically, like you get 3 card plays a turn. How am I able to exploit that against the types of enemies I'm fighting and the types of decks that I'm building based on the different heroes that are in my squad? And I am just like completely floored by that. The depth of those mechanics. Like you can play cards and whatnot, and then some of the enemies, when you kill them, it like refunds that card, and it's figuring out how to string that along. But at the same time, you can use objects in the environment that can kill enemies that don't use a card play, but then they cost the heroism points that you gain that you need to play cards. And so like taking all of these mechanics and whatnot and fleshing them out and giving them new kind of like depth with each new character that's introduced, but of course also the ways in which you can modify your deck and upgrade cards and re-roll stat abilities. And suppose for people that don't know, like Midnight Suns is very much leaning into the realm of the more horror side of the Marvel universe, because you have, these evil forces that are basically corrupting Marvel heroes and Marvel villains, and then you have to fight them, these like perverted versions of them in terms of like whether it's the Hulk who's normally good. Now he's like this demonic version, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose like for me, the only thing that I still don't seem to care much about is like the narrative. I don't know. I can't really get into it because of the fact that, I don't know, it feels much like my main complaint with this game was about the Hunter, that it's kind of just this, generic vessel for allowing the player to be in this world, to have somebody on your team that is like starting from square one, just like the player is themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't necessarily find the story all that compelling, but like I had said previously, I really do enjoy sort of the the depictions of these established characters like Blade and Captain America and Wolverine. Like they are basically the best versions of these characters outside of what's depicted in, the MCU films. So I think in regards to that, I like all the side stories with the characters, but the overall narrative and the sort of like Abby and running around, it still doesn't do much for me. And if anything, it makes me appreciate that aspect of XCOM that I always loved, which is like you have the meta base building and everything and upgrades, but you can get through that in like 2 to 3 minutes before you dive into the next match. And exploring the Abbey grounds, I think, is a little padding because I don't want to have to run around to pick up, 10 extra essence or whatever. I want to just do my upgrades, do this, do that from like 1 or 2 menus, and then dive right back into the missions. But that's a small complaint when I've, approaching 60 hours and I still haven't even gotten the DLC for this. So that's surely going to add a bit more, couple additional tens of hours to my time with this.
Yeah, and as I said before, it's totally worth doing as well because they do add extra to the story you've got. It's classic Firaxis in that the bones are sitting there, and that an expansion or a sequel would like kind of push what they've got into a new direction and like revitalize it further. It's exactly what happened with the XCOM games, with Enemy Within and with XCOM 2, where you got those expansions and it was like, woof, yeah, this game is now like not only better, but like you can't remember playing the original in the same way because they add so many improvements. I mean, it's a bit different in the structure here, obviously, because the characters are like the expansion, effectively, and they enter into that game seamlessly in the same way that the expansions do for XCOM games. But obviously, it don't add as much, I suppose, beyond that. I mean, there are new missions, and you get to sort of have these characters in your story, and they're an interesting bunch of characters to have as well. In terms of like Morbius and Morbius and Storm and Deadpool and Venom and that. So it's always a great time with that game. And for me, I found it was like the more hours I got into it, the more I kind of procrastinate getting to the end and doing those last bits. And I think after I saw the ending of that game, I still spent a whole bunch of hours, because it sort of does that whole thing of like, the point of no return until you've beaten it. Then you can come back and sort of keep playing, like, and finishing up missions and stuff, and which is great if you get the DLC later because you could sort of go back and do those then. I mean, the only complaint then is they kind of feel out of whack in terms of when they arrive, like in the story, because you've kind of seen the end. But like that's true of any sort of game like this. You probably not as replayable in the same way as like XCOM games are for me. I think it kind of reminds me of like when Arcane did Deathloop, and like compared to Dishonored 2 or Prey, it's less replayable because it's doing those replays effectively in one longer playthrough, where each run is you figuring out aspects of how the overall winning structure is done, like that. And so it changes the format while still sort of retaining those great things about that those games do. And so yes, you kind of feel bad that, why am I not going back to this like I did XCOM? Like, and same as I said for Deathloop, why am I not coming back to it like I did with Dishonored 2 or Prey? It's like, and that's the answer. It's just it's designed not to quite be the same way. It's like, and that's absolutely fine because you get a more unique experience out of it. Only downside, of course, is don't think we'll get a sequel with this one, and like at the same time, it's like the freshness and the surprise of that game. Maybe it didn't need it, so it's fine. Like, and as a one-off thing, it's cool and well done. And like, given the Marvel games out there and how simple a lot of them are, it's amazing how much gets pulled off in Midnight Suns and works. Like, it's doing a little bit Mass Effect-y sort of storytelling and romancing effectively, to add to the sort of strategy side of it. And you spend so many hours early on thinking, is it going to work? Because it kind of feels a bit hokey and cheesy, but I think it's retaining that sort of comic book feel, like a classical sort of comic book feel, where there's a goofiness to what's going on, and it's done in such an earnest way because of people like really being into what they're making, that it rubs off on you. And like, I think that's why having a protagonist who's quite bland is good, because you are putting yourself more into that character and sort of how you interact with like the other characters. You're enough of a blank slate that you get to add the embellishments, if you will, which again feels like a throwback in terms of like, it's like you fill the blanks in, you be the vessel, like they don't just be a character, like be you as a character sort of thing.
Oh, that's a good point. I think I've maybe softened just a bit in terms of like this notion of you playing this basically like new protagonist, this new hero, just because of the fact that while I don't care from a narrative standpoint, my guy is badass and leveled up at this point, and he's a huge obviously, because I would say 75+% of the missions you play, you have to use him, but at the same time, like, he becomes an essential part not just because of the force nature of it, but because of the fact that he has abilities that, just like, again, is the case with, I think, all of the heroes. You can make squads of heroes that, like, on paper, if you were to describe their combat style, it might not make sense to pair some of them with one another. However,
Yeah.
they still have abilities that are quite viable to string together. Or at the same time, like, you can bolster more of like a spellcaster type of a squad with other spellcasters because of the fact that you're going to find at least one ability that you can string together in a way that makes sense, at least. And I think that for me, what is a obvious feature of some missions, but at the same time, it really is like one of the most integral parts of getting you to experiment outside of just like the same three heroes, is that some of those side missions are locked to include only certain heroes. So like you're going to have a magic one where you have to pick magic as one of your three, or an Iron Man, and so forth. And later on, the further you get into like the story missions, you quite literally have to go back and level some of those characters, which for the first 20 hours I didn't. Like, I'm not using magic as much as I should have. I wasn't using Ghost Rider almost at all. But then, and that was mostly because like I was bouncing off of their sort of like character profile, which is like Ghost Rider. A big thing for him is he takes damage to deal these attacks that for the most part might be zero heroism cost to play. And like, I didn't like that early on. However, once I get forced into situations where I have to utilize him and I have to go back and play some side missions to level him up, I start finding these nuances in his decks and his cards that I can start to string together that make him a character that I can use with profiles that are similar or completely foreign to him, but he complements it. And at the same time, other heroes complement his play style. So, to your point, I don't know that I'm going to go back and replay this the way that I would in XCOM, but I'm certainly going to spend probably 80 hours playing this. Like, I don't think that that's a stretch to say. And it would be for a majority of other games. But again, this is a Firaxis joint we're talking about. So it's not completely unheard of to spend almost 100 hours with one of their games.
Yeah, and I think adding a bit of context here, like, obviously very different games, but I put more time into one playthrough of Midnight Suns than I did, say, all of the Insomniac Spider-Man games put together. Because they're open world and they've got all these collectible and stuff, but they're 20-hour games at best.
Right.
Like, with one of them being like 6, really. Like, so yeah, it was probably half the time, if anything. Like, which is fine. I suppose that's what they are, but it's like, it shows that you don't have to just be big, dazzling, like, tech demos that look great. And the Spider-Man games are great fun, and like, they have great storytelling for them as well. But yeah, I just love the game that is here. Like, the whole thing feels like a game in a way that matters, like that.
Yeah.
It's nice to have like very cinematic games, great cutscenes and the visuals are amazing and all that, but games have their very distinct way of telling stories, and like, this feels more like that, like, than something where you are feeling like you're not really making much difference and much control in it. This really does put you in the center of something, and it's like, really, I mean, as any comic book fan, especially a Marvel fan, like, the chance to sort of hang out with a bunch of Marvel heroes and be like the center of attention in that is like quite like dream stuff. Like, and I think it's handled quite well.
Yeah. Oh, and I probably won't stop talking about this once I pick up the DLC inevitably. I was so fortunate. I think it was last summer. Epic Game Store had this as one of their free giveaways, which is great. And like, I mostly now when I'm playing games, I do the remote play for Steam from my gaming PC to my MacBook, so I can sit on the sofa with my fiance or what have you, and just like play that in the background while we're watching TV. But that means I have to wait for Epic Games, the Epic Game Store's summer sale to pick up the DLC, because obviously it's not going to transfer over between Steam and whatnot. So I'm sure it's not the last I'll yammer about this game, but I think at the same time, like, it just speaks to when you have a really great developer that is at the helm of something, even if you have a good amount of doubt um, in terms of like the structure or the sort of changes from what they've done previously, like you still need to give that the benefit of the doubt because could end up with a game that you're going to spend close to 100 hours with that you thought you wouldn't spend 8 hours with. So
Yeah,
it's a good problem to have.
that's it. And I will say, certainly in the UK at least, at the time of recording today, which when this episode goes out on Monday, the whole game is on sale with all the stuff, like 18 quid, I think.
Yeah.
So like, and even the base game's like 750, and like the season pass is a tenner. So like you can get those things, and it's honestly worth it. Like it's ridiculous how slept on it is as a game. It's more streamlined than XCOM. It's more of an RPG than you'd expect, and yeah, it's got some rough edges in terms of trying to marry those things together. But there's just nothing like it in terms of Marvel games, and like yeah, it at a time where I was kind of like a bit about Marvel games and Marvel stuff in general, it was a real shot in the arm, and like I could have hated it, especially given it was Firaxis doing this rather than XCOM. But it's a lovely surprise and still like one of my favorite games of the decade, like in terms of what it brought.
No, I think that's a good shout. Over here, you can get the base and all the DLC for $16, I think. Yeah, 16, $20. So at the same time, like, you mentioned we probably will never get a sequel. I don't think that this is the type of game that necessarily even needs one or that should impede anybody's decision because of the fact that, like we've been saying, it's not necessarily like, oh, there's a ton of replayability here, like with in XCOM, but you're getting what is probably the best Marvel or superhero centric strategy game that you could get in terms of like turn based and whatnot. Because like the mechanics are just so strong, they're so simple to describe, and yet again, I'm finding new combinations and new strategies in these mechanics at 50 hours in, and I'm sure once I get that DLC, might not be the most substantial of the DLCs you've ever seen, but at the same time, like it's going to add enough, I would bet, that it makes me rethink a couple of other strategies based on other heroes. But before we get out of here, there's one more game that you've been playing that I'd also had a chance to play back in the day. Why don't you wrap us up with what you've been playing?
Oh, that'd be Maneater, which given we are coming into 4th of July weekend for America, why not play a game about a marauding shark? It's almost tradition. I mean, it's again a game that I think came out just about the time the current console generation was just upon us nearly, and so it was like an end of that gen, beginning of the new gen sort of thing. And I remember it very distinctly that way because I think it was one of the first games to sort of get that sort of next gen port at the time. The concept is very simple. It's like the game Jaws Unleashed, which was just you like digging around in like an almost open and worldish shark sim, like where you just get to cause all kinds of carnage, stuff that was ridiculous, more deep blue sea than Jaws. Let's be fair. And this is more like Sharknado than it is Deep Blue Sea in terms of how ridiculously over the top it goes in terms of mutations and silliness, and with what I would call like a Saints Row-esque sort of tone to it as well, like in terms of like just how the open world is and the sense of humor. Like you've got a narration by Chris Parnell, which is a highlight to the game. I mean, it's there. Everything's there to say, oh, this is the game that Jaws Unleashed was, but bigger and wilder, and it looks on the surface like so much. Yeah, like you were going to get such a fun experience of just like munching people to death as a shark and fighting other big beasts, and the evolution stuff sounds interesting. I don't know. It's probably the classic case of repetition, in terms of what it's doing. In like, it's got an open world, it's got some fun things in it, but it's you are just kind of just munching things, and that loses its appeal after a while because there's just so much of it. Like everything is munching and attacking, and so yeah, it kind of numbs you for a while after a while in terms of what's there. And I when I played it at the time, that's probably what put me off it after a while. That and like the control scheme is like really, to pardon the pun, swimmy. It just, yeah, the movement doesn't feel right, and it actually quite. I think the original version kind of upset me in terms of like my sort of sense of balance, and like in terms of what made me feel a bit nauseous. But which seems to have improved with like the current gen version. But yeah, I don't know, it's just not much to do in an open world. Like there's not, there's a story, but it's like very minuscule. Like it's a bunch of like checklist stuff pieced together with some cutscenes and a basic tale of vengeance. But yeah, it doesn't really do much. Like, not that I'm expecting a story to be like the biggest thing, but the absurdity is right there to make this into something really ludicrous and have some fun set pieces with that. And you don't really. I mean, you have these like boss battles against like these bounty hunter types, and they all pretty much revolve around the same thing. Like, if you fight them here, fight them there, you can basically take the fight where you want the map, which means you find a strategy that suits you and done. And it's, yeah, it's kind of uninspiring in that regard. It is a pretty sort of brainless, like, jump around, bite some stuff, good fun for a few hours, and then it just quickly drains like your interest. Like, which is a shame. Because the idea is just there. Everything is there to make this like a winner, but I don't think they treat it as absurd as they try to make it look. Like it looks like it should be a wild throwback sort of open world, monster 'em up sort of thing, and it's not really. Like, there are more fun games that probably came out in the PS3 era that did better jobs of that stuff, like the prototype games and that, like, or even the infamous ones. I know they are more like human based, but yeah, here this is just, you're kind of restricted by what you are, and there isn't enough inventiveness in that.
No, that was more or less what I remembered with this game. I think I probably spent about 5 hours of it before the novelty of it truly wore off on me, because of what you said. Like, it is one thing to have the sort of like inherent gag of like, you're going to leap out of the water onto a golf course and shred a bunch of guys and then kind of like flip and flop your way back into the ocean and whatnot. And then, inevitably further down the line, you get to upgrade your shark and you get these mutations, and then you're going to fight orcas and other crazy water-based wildlife, if you will, and mercs and things like that. But yeah, after those 5 hours, I stopped because of the fact that it felt like I was still just doing the same thing over and over. It didn't feel like it had the true variety that, I don't know, like, it's difficult because, like, you mentioned Saints Row, right? Which I think is similar in a sense, where it's like you're taking something and you're reinventing it. Like, Saints Row was clearly started out as a GTA clone if you go back and play like the first two, but then it very much reveled in the lunacy and the sort of like over the top nature of it. But you saw a variety then that was applied with that logic that gave that game some real longevity that I never would have assumed that the series would have had. Like 3 and 4, to the point where you become the president with superpowers. Like, you would never see that coming based on the first two games. Whereas with, Maneater, there's novelty there. There's certainly some fun moments, but like you'd said, the first like few hours of that game are not drastically different than the last few hours of that game, I would assume, even with those mutations and whatnot, because you're still doing the same shit. I'm still jumping onto land, and then I'm trying to get back into the water as quickly as possible. I'm still fighting denizens of the deep, and I'm still dealing with, the humans that are hunting me. But it never really provides a layer of strategy or a layer of difficulty outside of like health bars extending, which really does not make for anything very satisfying that's worth pursuing outside of, like I've said, the first handful of opening hours of it. I will say, like, it was nice to see Tripwire Interactive try something different. Them moving on from, multiplayer based shooters, whether it's the Killing Floor horror side of things or Red Orchestra Rising Storm. And it was nice to see them take that sort of like approach to excessive gore with something new. But at the same time, like, their background in multiplayer based shooters works because that core gameplay loop is multiplayer focused and is satisfying in that context. But for a single player game that, I don't even know how long you would say that Maneater is, like, I don't know that makes for a rewarding experience for the 12 hours or so it looks like this game might take you to complete.
Yeah, it does outstay its welcome. I think that's the other thing. It's like, I can get why, but you probably could have been better off with something a bit more streamlined, maybe. Like, I get the idea of having a bit more freedom, but there's no real great sort of mechanics in place to make it worthwhile. And that's the main thing, which is, that's the game they made, and it does the job well enough for what it does, but like, could have been something more special, I think, and you didn't necessarily have to have like a bigger budget to do it or anything like I said. I think you could have simplified the kind of game it was and made it more focused on the absolute absurdity of like this mutating shark and what it could do, and have more of a story structure to sort of showcase that.
Yeah, I think that, we're not exactly asking a lot for, something that's like essentially a kaiju game in terms of like its story or the sort of experience overall. But at the same time, like, you need to lean a little bit more into the weird and the unique properties, I suppose, of something such as Maneater, because it's a game that has a lot of potential, but didn't necessarily deliver on that in compelling ways outside of, like, again, that initial novelty that you've experienced and probably grow pretty tired of, like 2 or 3 hours in, to be fair. But, at the same time, I think the novelty aspect of it in the right hands perhaps could still yield some interesting results down the line. But hopefully it's something that's a little bit more land-based than the limitations of the sea in that regard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's going to do it for us for this week in terms of what we've been playing. And of course, as always, be sure to go back and check out our latest episode of Horror Bites, our indie horror showcase that is bi-weekly. And instead of covering one game, we're now covering 2. Episodes are bi-weekly. And last week we did part 2 of our theme of space, where we both brought a game that was sci-fi horror themed and attacked that subgenre in 2 distinctly different ways, utilizing different genres. But yeah, until then, my friend, as always, it's a pleasure chatting horror with you for Safe Room.
Back at you, my man. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's main feed episode of Safe Room. If you've enjoyed our horrifying discussions, please take a moment to rate and review the show on your preferred podcast platform, as this helps us immensely in ensuring that the show continues to grow. For any and all show updates and additional content, you can follow Safe Room on all of our socials, which are linked in the episode notes, at SafeRoomPod. And finally, you can send any and all emails to saferoompod@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.